All right, this is a bit of an overview of a comparative essay structure, keeping in mind by far the hardest thing to do is actually to analyze comparatively well. And so the structure, think of it less as a structure that you need to follow, but perhaps more of sort of like a tick sheet or the themes that you should be trying to cover in each phase of the essay, be it the introduction, body paragraph, and conclusion. So just some general tips first. Always keep in mind the question and the wording of the question. There's a real tendency, at least in my experience, when you're responding to a comparative essay prompt, to kind of question the question and to sort of be like, well, yeah, you've presented a dichotomy between science and life or something, but what you really want to be talking about instead is something adjacent to that. And so it's quite easy to therefore leave behind the language that an examiner, tester, whatever the person reading your work is looking for. And so if the question set is life and the universe, and you say, well, it's not really about the universe, it's about the world, just make sure that you're at least retaining those words that are in the question or the prompt. Otherwise, it looks like you've just pre-prepared an essay, which is something that is quite frowned upon, as you might imagine. The main thing to keep in mind as well is to be balanced. So generally, there's a really strong tendency for whatever text you did most recently will be, 75% of the paragraph. But again, if you do that, it sends the message that maybe you're not as strong on the other one, or on the day you sort of forgot what you wanted to talk about, and so you just kind of got stuck into the text that you most enjoyed. And obviously that doesn't give as strong a sense of kind of knowledge and background in the text. As much as possible, try and avoid both. In terms of comparative sentences, we're thinking not of one topic sentence, but topic sentences. And this is kind of true for the introduction and in some respects the conclusion as well. There is a tendency to just say, yes, the theme is present in both texts, and then go into detail in both. In a separate sentence, that is. But usually you can then go back after the fact and delete the both sentence unless you really think it adds much to it. But keep in mind that that's where you're including, make sure again that you're including the right stem words from the prompt and not leaving them out or changing them too much. Try and as much as possible avoid saying same, but different, especially as a conclusion. The idea of your comparative essay is that you've developed a viewpoint, and by the end you're kind of strongly reiterating that, restating it. If your viewpoint, you get to the end and it's more or less, yes, I agree, both texts are the same but slightly different, and you don't have any specifics about how they're different, then you probably haven't really got into the level of kind of detail and maybe not provided the level of almost like argument that's required of a comparative essay, where you sort of want to set a pretty strong viewpoint and be able to back it up as you go. Shades of grey is the goal. So if at any point you're saying, this issue is black and white, then you've probably missed the point. You're aiming very much for shades of grey between the two texts and between the two examples that you've provided. This is often why it's useful to do your introduction and your conclusion at the end, because as you develop your argument, it will be a lot easier to do those at the end, or maybe even topic sentences as well. Like you can just start analyzing as much as possible and then come back to the topic sentence once you've done that and sort of see what you said rather than vice versa. It's kind of an advanced technique perhaps, and it might not naturally flow with the way that you think or the way that you write, but it's just something worth considering, I believe. So this is someone else's overview of a comparative intro. So I'm going to fly through it really quickly. They would say respond to prompt 1 for text 1, prompt for text 2, rough comparison for later analysis, acknowledge similarities and differences, and then provide an overview of points to follow. So that's your firstly, secondly, thirdly. That doesn't really give us the level of complexity that we're after in VCE. But it does give you a really, the idea of the triangle coming down is a pretty good way to think about it, in the sense that you're kind of going from big ideas to specifics and kind of then closing off with some little thoughts before you jump into your paragraph. Sadly, this looks a lot more complicated, but it's basically shorter than your average introduction, but you have to do everything more or less twice. So respond to the prompt for text 1 and text 2. You could do that in the same sentence if you're quick. You don't really need to, so don't stress if you can't. It's really useful to talk about context, especially in the introduction. And you might pick out specific examples of this later, but an introduction for a comparative essay is usually the sort of thing that you can just have sitting there and more or less use the same context sentence each time. So if you have a big overall statement of, during the 1970s, the major forces were this, this, and this, big social things that were happening, space race, Cold War, COVID-19, those kind of big things that sort of have large effects, World War I, World War II, after World War I, after World War II, kind of big sort of statements like that. You can then give specific dates and years and events further in the piece, but it might be useful to pause now actually and just to write a context sentence for each of the texts. And this, unless something really dramatic happens in the prompt or the question, this should be pretty kind of all-purpose useful. Again, the authorial intent, views or values, whatever you want to call that specifically, that will change based on the prompt. So you can't really pre-prepare, this is what they think about all of the issues in the world. So it's probably better to just make a viewpoint on those once you have your prompt. Say something like, director's view on truth is that it is not black and white and that there are many different facets of it and it's okay to lie or something like that. And then you could, if you're really showing off, you could try and connect that to your context. That would be sort of next level, where you would be saying, and this is likely because at the time, just after World War II, people were starting to question the validity of truth or something like that would be amazing. And then you've just got your basic stuff. You need your signposting. And again, it definitely helps to do this here and to do the planning, but the actual body paragraphs that you write you might change as you go. And then keep in mind, this, you could probably cut that if you're short on time or anything, but probably save that for the conclusion. In fact, I would just leave that out most of the time. All right, we've got our body paragraph. So topic sentence, comparing both briefly. Wow, talking's hard. Topic sentences is what I always have to remind myself, because otherwise what it asks us to do here is technically functionally impossible to do in one sentence. So it asks us to use meta-language correctly to put forward an argument about authorial construction, language or literary devices, and intentions. So obviously we're going to avoid doing that in one sentence because that's quite clunky. Whether you break this into 3 topic sentences or 2, it's probably up to you. I would probably aim to do 2 because in general the third would just be the both, which is just pure filler. Then we're going to outline our evidence, our authorial intent and authorial style, and our context. So kind of the same as what we've always done, but twice, and keeping in mind you sort of want to do that. Which is quite easy actually, because if you think of your comparative phrases, whereas, by contrast, these are pretty all-purpose. You can say almost anything and that naturally connects it up. You don't really need to have much of a narrative flow. Like I could just say, here's a quote from text 1 which shows this thing, whereas here's a quote from text 2 that shows this thing. Even if those 2 things don't actually match up or connect or flow naturally, it would be nice if they did. But even if they don't, the whereas kind of just cohedes them together anyway. Not sure if that's a word. And then just to keep in mind that what we're being asked to do is to analyze, to compare authorial construction, language, literary devices, and intentions in relation to the argument. So they all need to be linking back to our topic, and analyze the ways in which text represents authorial views, values, and contexts. So all those things, again, you probably just want to be ticking them off. Have I done evidence? Yep. And those sort of things. Style, what a mess I've made. Style, you're thinking film, techniques, quotes, literary, all that. You're thinking about becoming better at writing on a screen like I am. These are what your body paragraphs look like. 3 is always the goal. 2 is probably acceptable in a pinch, but 3 is, as ever, the goal. Conclusion can be super short. Respond to the question for prompt 1, prompt 2, mention authorial style for both texts. So you might say how that was sort of shown, the opinion of the thing that you're talking about. and then comment on the authorial intent of the text, and that's really all you need in the conclusion. You don't really need to restate the stuff that you've already said. You're just more or less saying they believe this, they showed it through this, and we think that that is because of this intention of theirs. So that's probably a longer video than I intended, but that's a bit of granular information about the structure. And now we can start to think about kind of, once we've got the analysis out of the way, the hardest part, the structure that we sort of build around it.